KFOG.
KFOG, baby.
KFOG. KFOG.
KFOG.
KFOG.
Hi, I'm Steve Cushman, and thank you all for being here tonight. And our guest speaker series is proud to present Peter Finch, who some of you may know. And Peter was a big part of my life, being a San Francisco native. And when you, in my era, which was a little past KYA and KWB and KFRC, and when life was almost meaningful, I was then listening to KSAN, and the second thing that comes out of your mouth after KSAN is KFOG, and it really meant a lot to me. And the morning show was a ritual for me because these guys were just great. So without further ado, Peter Finch.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for being here. When I was asked to do this, I was honored and thinking, do I have anything to talk about? Come next July, it'll be 50 years since I first got a job on radio, and I was thinking, yeah, I got a few stories, and I'll be among my tribe, people who love radio, right? Hopefully that's, well, yeah. And as you're going to hear tonight, I love radio. I was able to find my calling at a young age, and it's worked out really nicely. But so I was born in Hey, Pat, come on over. He and I have been friends since junior high. I've got a story involving him, too, here in a minute. But, so I was born in 1959, so after the golden age of radio, but I feel like I was born into the golden age of transistor radio. As a young kid, listening to top 40 radio on AM was just so much fun. First 12 years of my life, 1959 to 1971, I lived in North San Diego County, Del Mar, Encinitas, and KCBQ. Yeah, did you just say that? Yep, KCBQ. That was our top 40 station, and all these great songs coming out of it. And then the two memories I have of KCBQ too was they did a promotion once where they would call people at random. And if you picked up the phone, you didn't say hello. If the first thing you said was, I listened to Fun Lovin' KCBQ, I think you won $100 or something like that. So that was fun. The other memory I have from KCBQ is, I think when I was, 1969, at 10 years old, we stayed up till midnight on New Year's Eve, and they were doing a countdown. And when it got to number one, before he played it, the DJ said how much he hated the song and that it was criminal that it was the number one song. And what I took from that throughout my career is if you're working at a radio station, presumably if your station is playing a song, it's a great song, right? Why else would you be playing it? So anyway, any guesses, number one song, 1969, that the DJ took exception to? You got it! Sugar, Sugar by the Archies. So bubble gum for sure. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs down there. So many of you probably agree with that DJ, but it wasn't, the point was, it wasn't about him. It was about the station and the music playing. Good knowledge. I'm impressed. My first experience with Bay Area radio came when I was going into 7th grade, 12 years old. I came to live with a family member in El Cerrito. And so the top 40 stations there, the two were KYA, KFRC, thank you. So those were our top 40 stations. Also, I listened a lot. I think I would wake up to KSFO because Jim Lang was the morning DJ. It's like, that's the guy from The Dating Game. And then at night, Gene Nelson would play old radio shows, which was a lot of fun to listen to. And then one day at school, somebody told me, they said your name on the radio, KYA. I had sent in a postcard, and they picked my name, and I won a transistor radio. So Pat and I, one day, we got on an AC transit bus, rode over to San Francisco, hiked up Nob Hill to where the studios were. Do any of you remember they were these like ball and chain transistor radios? The radios were round and they were on a chain. Yeah, so that's what I won. It was green. Thank you for asking, Steve. Pea green. Avocado green. Avocado green is a better, yeah, and gosh, I wish I still had it, but who knows what happened to it. Yeah. And was that the day, Pat, that we went on our way, you had heard about this cool FM station, KSAN, and we tried to find it, and we showed up at a door, and like, no way we were going to get, that was it. Okay. So we were thwarted there, but we did make it to KYA, and I got my radio there. So, yeah, 2 years attending junior high at Adams Junior High in Richmond. The only reason I mention that, and a fun fact, at one point on KFOG, there were 3 of us among the on-air staff who had all gone to Adams Junior High in Richmond. I don't know what the odds of that are, but me, Big Rick Stewart, and a late-night DJ named Terry Adams, we had all gone to Adams Junior High, which it turned out later sat right on a fault line and is no longer a school, right? So for high school, I moved down. I joined my mom and one of my sisters in Santa Maria, south of San Luis Obispo. And it turned out to be a great place to start a radio career because it was a small town, but they had 3 radio stations. And I started like when I was 15 doing the Santa Maria High School Report as part of their public affairs to air early on Sunday mornings. And then just by kind of hanging out and being an enthusiastic pest of a kid, one of the stations, KXFM, which kind of patterned itself after KSAN, said, all right, put them on the air. And I was paid, I forget, maybe $6 an hour or something. But my first shift, I would work from 6 a.m. to noon. I was only on the air from 6 to 8 a.m., and then for the next 2 hours, they had a religious program Sunday morning hosted by a former hippie who had found God. And it was an interesting show. And then the last 2 hours from 10 to noon, the owner of the station wanted to be on the air, but he didn't want to run the board. So I'd run the board for him, and he'd get his thrills being on the radio for 2 hours. But from there, they said, okay, well, we'll put you on overnights as a DJ. And it's like, okay. And, you know, my mom didn't have to worry about me being out all night because she could turn on the radio, and there I was. And it was just a great introduction. You know, you meet a lot of radio people who, the ones that got started in high school, were lucky enough to live in a smaller market where if you were an enthusiastic kid, you know, and made enough of a pest of yourself, they'd finally put you on. So at one point, I went to summer school down near San Diego and stayed with my grandparents. And I took a ceramics class where a lot of the students were making like bowls and some were making bongs. But I made a replica of an RCA microphone. That's how committed, I mean, that's how into radio I was. Yes, I was a nerd, a radio nerd. But I also took a summer school class on radio and TV, and I found a textbook in the library, Radio and TV Announcing, written by Stuart Hyde, and it said he was a professor at San Francisco State University. So I said, okay, that's where I'm going to go to college. And I ended up actually becoming friends with Dr. Hyde, had some classes with him, went to an A's playoff game with him and one of my buddies. Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get into the broadcasting department straight ahead as a freshman, which a lot of people, it took them a couple of years. But, oh, and by the way, in the meantime, still in San Diego in high school, my dad had driven me down to the FCC office so I could take the test for my third-class license, which you had to have if you were on the air and running the board. And I flunked it the first time. You actually had to know some math back in those days, like engineering type stuff, and you had to figure it out. And I think the second time, as you can see, I got it. But after that, you just kind of sent away for it, and they sent it back to you. It got easier after that. But so I had an FCC license, and I was all set to come up to college and go to San Francisco State, which I did, and I got a DJ show on KSFS as a freshman. And then after my freshman year, I went back to Santa Maria. I spent the summer on KXFM. And then as my dad was driving me back up to San Francisco, back to the dorms through Salinas, heard this station in Monterey, K-Wave. And it sounded pretty good. And so I sent the program director a tape and a resume, and he hired me to do weekends. And this is my ultimate paying your dues story. I told it when I got inducted into the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame in 2014. I got a job as a weekend jock, living in the dorms at San Francisco State, did not own a car, so I'd get up bright and early Saturday, catch Samtrans to SFO, hop a United flight to Monterey, walk across the street to the radio station, do the 6 to midnight shift, slept on a couch in the lobby of the women's restroom, got back up, did the noon to 6 shift, walked back across the street, caught a flight back to San Francisco. I think I was making like $10 a weekend, but I was on the radio, and it was so exciting. The program director, Randy Summers, was a really nice guy, and he even brought me in a space heater because it was kind of cold in the women's restroom in the middle of the night. And also, I guess the station owner hadn't been told, because one day he walked into the studio and said, "My wife just found a man's wallet in the women's restroom." And I said, "Mine." I had to sheepishly tell him that it was mine. But it was, it wasn't going to be too sustainable, because that was kind of a rough thing to do every weekend. But I did it over 6 months, and I enjoyed it. In the meantime, as a sophomore, I was named the program director of the campus radio station at San Francisco State, KSFS. And I'm going to read some cringeworthy stuff tonight. This is the first one. This was an article from one of the campus newspaper. It says, "New director gives KSFS its sound." And it begins, "The mellow sound of Boston flows from the KSFS control room at SF State. The music reflects the taste of the new program director, Peter Finch." At one point in the article, she describes me as the tall, slightly disoriented Finch, which actually describes me pretty well. And then as for the cringeworthy part, I'm quoted as saying, "We are a progressive rock station with a few variations," Finch said. "My taste is more mellow than, say, the new wave punk rock that a lot of people are into, yet I won't play Carly Simon all day long either." Then I went on to say we had a variety. We had a gospel show and jazz show and country western shows. So anyway, got into the campus newspaper there and was doing well at San Francisco State, totally enjoying my classes. And then one day I walked into the office, and they had a binder there of job opportunities, and it said that KMEL, then an AOR, album-oriented rock station, was looking for a campus correspondent. So I reached out and did a report for them, and they liked me, so they started using me there, and it's like, a foot in the door. I got an internship in the news department, working under Joe Rogelski, who kind of became something of a mentor to me there. Still kind of wanted to be a DJ. That's what I had started out as. And one night, I was there at 2 a.m., as an enthusiastic intern is, and the overnight jock didn't show up. There was some confusion with the scheduling, and the jock who got off at 2 a.m. wanted to go home. And I said, "I've got my third-class license." And he's like, "All right," and the first record, it was records, and I'm trying to cue it up, and my hand's shaking. And he's like, "Oh, no, this is," and it's like, no, I got this. And I ended up doing the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift, recorded it. Also, Joe Rogelski and our morning DJ, Alex Bennett, were kind of champions of mine, or they thought I was a nice kid. And so they talked me up. The program director said, oh, he did a good job, you should use him. And so they ended up giving me the weekend overnight shift, which ironically I've come full circle. I work weekend. Yeah, I'll be on overnight tonight on KCBS. But and at one point there, and I'll pass this around at some point, but they came out, and this is kind of cool to look through because it lists a lot of concert venues that aren't here anymore. And it's got little blurbs on the announcers, and there I am, and cringeworthy thing number 2, I'll read. And I don't know if I wrote this or somebody in promotions wrote it. When he was just 5 years old, Peter Finch was separated from his parents at a family outing. That didn't stop him from becoming what he is today, whatever that is. Now at the KMEL, Peter is under the guidance of veteran radio personality Alex Bennett, who has vowed to turn the 22-year-old, or as Alex refers to him, the punk kid, into a radio superstar. Right now you can catch Peter pulling the weekend all-nighters, asked what keeps him awake at 3 a.m. He replies, strong tea, a picture of Pat Benatar, and the best rock and roll in Northern California. I don't know that I actually said that, but that's a quote that they attributed to me. Also, we had a 7th birthday concert, and it was at the Greek Theater in Berkeley, and it featured the Greg Kinn Band with Missing Persons and 415. Why have I kept this t-shirt? There was a woman who used to come into the ice cream store I worked at on Terraville out in the Sunset District while in college, and I saw her the day before, and I asked her out, and so it was our first date, and we've been married 41 years now. So, yeah. So I'll pass this around. It's a couple pictures from that concert. It features the whole air staff, and you'll see the elderly woman right in the middle. That was Alex Bennett's mother, who had a shift on the station for a while. The owner's St. Louis station, Casey, had used the mother of one of the jocks, and it had gone over big. And yeah, so anyway, if you've been in radio for a while, you may recognize some of the faces in this picture. And Pat Johnson, the rock photographer, happened to be there and took a picture of me and Alice on our first date. It's a little dark, and for some reason I look super stoned, which I wasn't. I was just about radio these days. But anyway, it's neat to have that picture. So I guess I'll start it there, and you can pass it around if you want to look at it. I've got a few things that you can pass around, then when it gets to the back, just set it somewhere there. Yeah, I'll give you this as well. All right, so here I am. I'm the overnight weekend jock, still doing some stuff in news. Also at one point probably took on my worst experience in my radio career, which was they had me programming all the songs, which is something a computer should have done, but instead I was sitting there with these 5x7 cards going through all of them, and you had to separate the artists and stuff like that. And it was brutal. Don't tell anybody, but I put a hole in a wall because I threw a chair because I was getting so frustrated. And I was still doing some stuff in the news department, and during the winter I'd produce the ski report. During the summer I'd produce the surf report. And in 1984, the Democratic National Convention came to town. It was held at Moscone Center. And this will be a theme, my mother and my wife have called me ambitious, and I was like, hey, and I said, no, in a good way, and I have always been. So anyway, the Democratic Convention was coming to town. I would try and report on it for rock stations around the country. Any clients, I put myself out there, and I actually do think I got about 6 clients: Rochester, New York, Santa Barbara, 2 stations in Colorado, because Gary Hart was running that year. I did some stuff for KMEL, and I thought it went pretty well, so much so that I sent some of the work to the head of NBC Radio News. I think it was called The Source. And her name was Sherry Lewis. She was the news director. And one day I show up at home and I get my mail, and there's a letter from NBC. I will read it to you now. Imagine my excitement when I opened this up and read, let's see, August 2nd, 1984. Dear Peter, how shall I put this? Perhaps honesty is the best policy. I hated your tape. Do you really believe that the best way to cover a convention for AOR stations is by sidebarring them to death? Do your listeners, let's see, do you really think that the way to gain credibility with your listeners is by sounding as though you were born with a permanent smirk in your voice? I found your convention coverage to be boring and unimaginative, completely devoid of creativity and approach. Your style reminded me of news for the 70s when nobody knew how to talk to rock listeners as intelligent beings. That's not how we do things at The Source. We're talking to young adults whose interests, and we've got lots of supporting research on this, extend far beyond sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I don't want to give you a lecture on the news philosophy of The Source, so let me end this by saying what you've probably guessed by now. I don't see a future for you at The Source. I would recommend that you get more experience under your belt, preferably in a market more typical of most of the country. I absolutely love San Francisco, but it's very much a one-of-a-kind market, and the tape you've sent sounds as though you need to broaden your horizons. Thanks for your inquiry, and good luck. So why have I kept this letter all these years? Maybe as a little motivation. I'm going to prove you wrong, Shelley Lewis. Yeah. Yeah, that was. I showed this after I got it to John Evans, who was the news guy on KMEL at the time, and he was like, "Did you cry, Peter?" I said, "No, I didn't cry. I just thought it was so amazing that somebody would spend so much time going to all that effort to tell you how much they hated your work." And I also kind of resolved that I would never write a letter like that to anybody. You know, if they wanted a review if they wanted me to review their air work or their tape or whatever, and I wasn't a fan of it, I'd try and find something positive to say, but I wouldn't go that route. So anyway, what did happen was one of my clients. All right, so here's what happened. Alice and I had been dating for 2 years. We got married. We went on our honeymoon to Hawaii. And when I got back, I found out that KMEL had changed format to a more urban hip-hop, sort of what it's become these days, and that my services were no longer required. And it was like, man, we could have stayed in Hawaii longer, you know. But what happened out of that was one of my clients in Colorado, KBCO, liked what I had done. They had an opening, so they hired me to do news for them. And it turned out great in that this was a station in Boulder, fun college town, but it was just going from being a small Boulder station to being a Denver metro station. So I got it right as it was kind of taking off. And they were pioneering this new format, and they didn't call it a format, they just called it the music they were playing, but they eventually dubbed it AAA, Adult Album Alternative, and it would beget other stations. KFOG morphed into that later, which served me well. But I ended up being part of the morning show there for 8 years. And in addition to getting there right when it was taking off in the ratings, it was also a great place to be the news person because the station at that time was owned by a city councilman who had, a vested interest in Boulder. He wanted it not just to be a music station, but to cover news as well. As a result, I got to go to the '88 Republican convention in New Orleans. I got to go to Nicaragua when the Contras and Sandinistas were going at it, because there was a group from Boulder, a Friendship Cities group. Boulder's kind of like if Berkeley and Santa Cruz morphed together, but very progressive. And this group was going down there, and I said, I'd love to go along. And the owner said, okay. The only stipulation was I had to sign a release saying if I got killed, my wife wouldn't sue the station. All right. And then this was also a time when Denver was all about the Broncos. They had the Nuggets. They didn't have a hockey team yet. They didn't have the Rockies yet. They were all about the Broncos. And one year there, I started to cover some of the games. I wasn't a major beat reporter, but they made it to the AFC Championship game, and they were going to be playing the Browns in Cleveland. And the station wanted to send me, and the Broncos PR people said, you're not one of our regular beat reporters, and we can't do it. And apparently I learned later that somebody in our management talked to Barry Fay, who was like Denver's Bill Graham, the big concert promoter there, and apparently he pulled some strings so that I found myself at the AFC Championship game in Cleveland. Oh, was he here? You're here. Let me look at the credential. If you're into sports at all, it was the drive where John Elway led them down the field at the end, and they won it in overtime. January 11th, 1987. But here's the thing. Working press, no seat, not good in press box. So they had me in the stands with all these Browns fans who were very nice, but the thing was, there was this freezing drizzle blowing off the lake, and I've never been colder. I had on long johns, 2 pairs of socks, cap and gloves, and I was still freezing. But that said, I was there, and I got to cover 3 Super Bowls while in the 80s, all featuring the Broncos. And they were blown out in every one of those Super Bowls. So then I had to go in their locker room and say, how does it feel? So my show and tell for this, I'll show you a couple things from my years in Colorado. I'll do the press release, a couple pictures from Nicaragua, a picture of me interviewing George McGovern, a picture of me interviewing Yoko Ono. And also in Colorado, so I was kind of a big fish in a smaller pond, at least compared to San Francisco. So there's also an invitation to dinner from the governor at the governor's mansion. And later when my son was born, he sent a nice note. And Senator Tim Worth called to say congratulations, so that was kind of cool. So, well, yeah, you probably don't have time to read this. It's Peter Finch signing off after 8 years with KBCO, and it tells the story of how I was called in. Dennis Constantine was my morning show co-host. I was his news guy. He was also the operations manager. And he called me in one day and he said, we don't think you're very happy here. And I said, well, I'm not unhappy. But they picked up, and maybe I was part of my ambition. I wanted to get back to San Francisco or whatever. And also they had been cutting back on the news department and I was the news director. So anyway, Dennis said it was a hard decision, but they had to let me go. Yeah, I'll keep that article up here, too long to read. Also, another article from the Daily Camera. For some reason, they reported when I was doing my master's thesis defense. I was like, we ran into KBCO's Peter Finch at the, at the Memorial Center. He was getting ready to defend his thesis. The thesis was on the effects of DJ newscaster interaction on the newscaster's credibility, appeal, and retention of what they said. It's an interesting study. The results weren't as definitive as I would have liked them, but it got some dialogue going. So, if you want to pass that around. Yeah. Okay, so that took me to 1992. And I assume Steve, I don't know where Steve is, but okay, we'll be taking questions at the end, right? And okay, if you have any comments on any of this. But so 92, I'm without a job, and looking for a new one. I had been lucky in that at this point I hadn't had to be a radio gypsy, round and round, up and down the dial. I didn't have to do that. That was an 8-year run in Colorado. That was pretty good. There was a station in Phoenix showing some interest, but also KFOG radio in San Francisco was starting to go AAA. In fact, one of my bosses at KBCO was consulting them. My wife had been a real trooper in that she was a native San Franciscan, close to her family. She graduated UC Berkeley, got married, and moved to Colorado all within 3 months. So that was a lot to ask, but she was a real trooper. So I really kind of wanted to get her back to San Francisco too. So we came back. I had met with the folks at KFOG, and they, of course, knew all about KBCO, and they were saying, we don't have anything full-time for you, but, you can fill in on news if you want. So I started doing that, and also they shared a newsroom with KNBR. Frank and Mike were on in the morning, and I did some stuff in their news department. And after maybe half a year, I guess Marshall Phillips, who was the news guy on KFOG, apparently wanted to do some more stuff with KMBR, he ended up being the news guy for Armstrong and Getty in Sacramento for many years, and may still be doing it, I'm not sure. But anyway, it was like he was eager to move on, and when I had filled in, Dave Morey and I had really hit it off. We got along well. And so one night, the program director, Paul Marslek, and the consultant, John Bradley, who had been my PD in Colorado, took me to dinner and said, we want you to be the full-time, morning news guy. I was like, yes, this is it, major market, big leagues, KFOG. And that worked out great. I started in '93. It was me and Dave. Kim Wonderly was our morning traffic person for the first 7 years I was there. She may have split the time between Frank and Mike and us, but she was doing traffic, and it was me and Dave. We had a variety of producers over the years, and they were all good. Sometimes they were college interns and stuff like that, but they did a great job. But I think I joined Dave right at a time when people were ready for a morning show that was kind of like NPR playing music. We were very conversational. We weren't like, hey, how are you doing there this morning? We were just hanging out and talking. And it seemed to go well. And at the time, the main competition, The Rocker, was airing a morning show out of LA, Mark and Brian, which morning shows out of LA don't always do that well in San Francisco, which late in its run, KFOG actually tried that. But anyway, so we had success to the point where not too long after I arrived, we're in the common area. I'm with Dave, and our general manager, Dwight, comes up and says, you're number one, 2554, which is like the holy grail, to be number. And without even thinking, I scooped Dave up in my arms and swung him around. I'm a little bit taller than him. He's like, oh, okay, this isn't something Marshall would have done. But he did not have a problem with it. And I'm going to share a few more things here. At one point, it's the only time I've ever been featured on a billboard. I don't think neither Dave nor I really cared for the artist's rendition of us, but it's cool to be on a billboard. I never actually got to see the billboard. I think it was somewhere in the South Bay, because one morning during the football season, I'd interview Steve Young. We had a setup at his home. Before the game on Friday and after the game on Monday. And one day he said, Peter, I saw you on a billboard. Oh, thanks, Steve. And those were fun interviews. Why on KFOG? Well, I think it was because our connection to KNBR. I don't know why, but yeah. But I guess Steve was commented later that doing the interviews with me kind of helped free him up, because it was so conversational and he could just be himself talking. So, yeah, I don't know where this billboard was, but pass that around. See what else. I'm going to share. Now this is really cool. When I'd been there about 5 years, so this would have been 97, 98, yeah. Got a letter from the CEO of, it was Susquehanna Falsegraph, which Falsegraph was a China company, and that somebody with Susquehanna married into that family, and it became Susquehanna Falsegraph. But yeah, I'll read this really quickly. Dear Peter, warmest congratulations on the anniversary of your 5th year with KFOG and Susquehanna Radio Corps. In 5 years, you've seen a lot of Susquehanna San Francisco, including the evolution of KFOG into the premier AAA station in the nation. Without a doubt, the morning show you share with Dave Morey is a big part of that success. Your unique approach to news combined with your natural, personable delivery fits the station perfectly and clearly gives our listeners what they want the way they want it. Congratulations again, Peter, on this important milestone in your career, and thanks for all that you do. On behalf of KFOG, best wishes for continued growth and success. Much better than that letter from Shelley Lewis, right? Yeah. But I also want to mention it because I don't know if radio company CEOs still do that, send personal letters. Maybe they do. I haven't gotten one. Well, I'll check that. One day at KCBS, the news director, they showed up at everybody's houses with their favorite beverage or whatever and nice notes. And so that's really appreciated. But the head honchos, I don't know if they send out letters like that anymore. Dave Kennedy was a great guy. And apparently they tried to be in the running for the station when Cumulus bought it, but they did not get it. The only plus there, though, Cumulus, we'll get into Cumulus in a little bit here, but they paid top dollar for the station. So it's like paying top dollar for a house right when the market falls out. And so maybe you don't spend that much on repairs and stuff like that. But I forget what the point I was going to make there, but just the fact that before Cumulus bought at one point, we had gotten a letter, all of us who worked for Susquehanna, from Louis Appel, who was the big guy, the owner. He was Mr. Susquehanna, and he expressed disappointment that nobody in his family wanted to carry on with owning these radio stations. And so they were turning it into an ESOP, employee owned, which is why I get a check for $200 every month. So that was the plus side. The downside is Cumulus bought it, and well, I won't go that much into that. I will show. I'll pass around a few pictures from the KFOG years. Are there any fog heads here? Okay, a few of you. All right. I'll describe these and then you'll see them as they go through. All right, staffers with Dave Matthews, the time he came by to do a meet and greet. We're all smiling and he's just like this. And I thought it was because he had been on the tour bus all night, but I think Rosalie told me later that he was so stoned. And every female employee, he would look them up and down and things like that. All right, so we'll have that. I did the Celebrity Nutcracker a few years with the Oakham Ballet, where they'd have us be the twin tin soldiers, and it would be media and sports figures. So the picture you'll see is me with Tony La Russa, Bill Miller of the Giants, and O'Donnell Foyle, who was with the Warriors, which they would match me up because I'm kind of tall with one of the biggest guys, and I'd have to go back to back against O'Donnell Foyle. And he was solid. And one year it was Lincoln Kennedy, who was with the Raiders, an offensive lineman. And all right, me and Eric Idle, which was fun because I was a big Monty Python fan. One with Lily Tomlin. One with Russell Crowe, who came by and is signing a banner with Rosalie in the background there. The only thing with Russell Crowe, he had a reputation for being really, So at one point on the air, I said, yeah, you're not such a bad guy. And he turned and looked at me. I think he was just messing with me. But made me blush a little. Anthony Bourdain, Kathleen Turner, George Takei, the Bacon brothers, Kevin Bacon. So you're 1 degree closer to Kevin Bacon now because I'm here. Ed Helms from The Office, Harry Shearer and his wife Judith Owens. So that's what you're going to do. So, and then, what else do I want to show you? I do want to read briefly at one point. So I had started at KFOG in '93. Renee, I think, became our traffic person in 2000. And about that time, Irish Greg became our morning show producer. They had both been at Live 105. Irish Greg was there, and then there was another Greg there. So that Greg was domestic Greg, and Irish Greg was Irish Greg. But this is from 2007, so it had been the four of us for a while. And Ben Fong-Torres wrote an article in his Radio Waves column in the Sunday Chronicle. And I'll just read like the first paragraph or two. I think he really hit upon what made the station work and what made our morning show work. Ben wrote, "As a birthday gift to myself last month, I visited the morning show on KFOG. It's no secret that the program with 24-year KFOG vet Dave Morey and his team is my favorite wake-up show for its easygoing blend of topical chatter, smart guests, interviews, phone calls, and eclectic music. It's lighthearted without being raucous, edgy without being mean, hip without trying to be. It's also as smooth as the break of dawn." And thank you, Ben. I mean, he put it just really nicely there. I think one thing people didn't realize just listening to the station was how frenetic it was behind the scenes. I think people thought we were just kind of hanging out there. But, we would record these phone interviews, and then Dave would start editing it. I had to do a newscast every half hour. So I would do a newscast, hit delete, start typing the newscast, deliver that one, hit delete, start doing the news. So I was pretty busy. Whoop, I'm going to get my water there in a second. And Renee was busy keeping track of traffic, and then Irish Greg was running around doing his producer thing. So I was pretty busy there. Just a second. In case you're wondering, worst guests and best guests we had, at least in my mind. My favorites were the ones that just seemed happy to be there, even at that time of the morning, or were just naturally friendly. I wasn't necessarily into her shtick that much, but Charo, I loved Charo. She was so sweet when she would come in. After she got off the air, she was teaching the staff how to do the Macarena and stuff like that. Let's see. I have a fun memory of Grace Slick coming in because she came in and she was saying, "Oh, Jefferson Airplane was great. Jefferson Starship, no." I said, "No, Jefferson Starship had some great songs." So we had her sit down and put on headphones, and we played the song "Play on Love." And then afterwards she'd say, yeah, it was pretty good, The musician Moby was always fun to have on because he was really smart and articulate. The most stoned guest we ever had was Andy Dick. He had been up all night with some other people, and they came in, and he had he was singing a song, but he had a woman flipping the pages on the lyrics for him. It was nice. He was just really baked. And then the person who really seemed angry to be there, and it goes against his television persona of, "Hey, I'm smiling and I'm a great comedian," Wayne Brady. Wayne Brady actually shoved Greg up against the wall at one point. I'm not sure what set him off, but he just came in a sour mood that morning. So there's a little bit of dirt for you there. Being at KFOG actually got me name-checked in a book I really like, A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius by Dave Eggers. I don't know if any of you have read it. But he had there was this child actor, Adam Rich, who was from 8 is Enough. Yeah, and Dave Eggers and some others, they had a thing called Might Magazine, where they reported that Adam Rich had died with the headline, "Fare thee well, gentle friend." And it was all a put on. Adam Rich hadn't really died, and I guess they got a lot of blowback from that. So they had to bring Adam Rich to town and parade him around to show he wasn't dead. And they came to KFOG, and this is just real brief, but Dave Eggers writes, "The next morning I pick him up at Best Western for the first of 2 radio interviews. So what are you working on these days?" asked Peter Finch, the compassionate disc jockey on KFOG. People over the years have referred to me as a disc jockey, which I'm okay with, but I was kind of the news guy there. But anyway, well, I'm putting together a period piece, a costume drama. Great, wow, and you'll be like producing and directing. Adam is amazing. I expected disaster, expected that callers would tear into him, that the DJs would make fun, but everything stays above board, and Adam is composed, assured, well-spoken, still a performer, still in control. And one reason I wanted to read that is that that's kind of how we treated all our guests. We weren't going to ambush anybody or be, really rude to them or try and provoke them. And the few times when I wanted to bring out a touchy subject, I would just be really apologetic. Or we were interviewing on the phone David Bowie one morning, and one of our morning services had put out that he was a collector of Nazi memorabilia. It's like, David, I hate to ask you this, but we saw this thing that says you're into Nazi memorabilia. And he was very, "Oh, no, it's bullshit." Well, a word that starts with B. Anyway, apparently, for the record, David Bowie was not a collector of Nazi memorabilia. We would get people on the phone sometimes, and they would be doing a whole series of radio interviews, and we wouldn't have known, like, if the one before us, they had been treated badly or what kind of mood they were in. And William Shatner, we had him on one day, and I asked him a question, and he starts making fun of me. And it's like, where's this coming from? And Dave Morey said afterwards, it's just a shtick he was doing. Don't worry about it. Yeah. So, all right, I was at KFOG for 18 years, which, if any of you know radio, that was a very good run. A lot of fun, a lot of great memories. At one point, Martin Short was doing a show at the Curran Theater, and they needed a plant that they would pull out of the audience, and that Jiminy Glick, I don't know if you know Jiminy Glick, would interview. So anyway, my daughter and I went, and I was going to be the plant, and they had a little X next to the seat so the person would know who to grab out of the audience, and they take me up. And I was interviewed on stage by Jiminy Glick, which was a real trip. But as I'm walking off stage afterwards, backstage, they're putting his next costume on. He says, "You were great." So that made me feel good, because they told me the guy the day before, I don't know who it was, but had given him like nothing, and it was like pulling teeth. So 18 years at KFOG, and Dave Morey retires. Dave is great. He's got a great sense of humor. He's a great radio guy. He loves to do radio. He always had a pirate radio station out of his house. He was getting burned out though, and they were paying him good money, and he's like, "I've got enough money." And even after he left, there was talk that maybe he was going to keep doing 10 at 10, but Cumulus wasn't going to give him the money that he wanted and stuff. So he was gone. Bill Webster came in, and it was fine. We were doing okay. But I think, now some of you may know, all right, years ago when I started at KMEL and KSAN, rock stations would have news morning, sometimes middays, and afternoons, and it's because the FCC said you needed to do this. Now, was the deregulation that took that requirement away? I always thought it was the Reagan administration, but was it Carter, or does anybody know? I don't know which administration it was, but all of a sudden there was this rule that they weren't making music stations do all this news. So nowadays, we find there are very few rock or music stations that do any news in the morning. And so I think what Cumulus was looking at is, why do we have this news guy on in the morning? Why are we paying him all this money? So at this point, Dennis Constantine, remember, he was the one that fired me in Colorado, and we're friends, and now he's my boss at KFOG. He's the program director, calls me into his office. And, you know, and at one point earlier, he had shown me a newspaper article from when he programmed a station in Portland, and the reporter asked him, "What's your biggest regret in radio?" And his quote was, "Having to fire, you know, my friend Peter Finch back in Colorado." So it's like, oh. So on this day, he tells me that they're shifting me to KGO, which was also owned by Cumulus. And I told him, I'm so glad you didn't have to fire me a second time. That would have been so rough on you, Dennis. But all of a sudden, I'm headed over to KGO on a traumatic day because they had just let all their talk show hosts go, except for Ron Owens. It was during the Occupy movement, and there were even some Occupy KGO protesters out front. So I walk into the newsroom, and one reporter, Jenna Lanes, bless her heart, says, "Oh, Peter, you're the one good thing that's happened today." But all of a sudden, I found myself doing the evening news on KGO, co-hosting it with somebody else. I'll pass around my employee card from KGO just because it's the only time I've ever had a Fu Manchu. It didn't last for too long. Nor did I at KGO. Actually, I made it 3 years, which, you know, in radio isn't that bad. I may have kind of known some of the writing was on the wall when 2014 the Giants won the World Series, and I hustled down to Willie Mays Plaza to interview people, and this one young man says, "Oh, so which podcast are you with?" It's like, radio's in trouble, but we knew it was. But anyway, I was there 3 years, and then the general manager, it was my day off, he calls me, he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you'd be here today. Anyway, we're letting you go." Yeah, we're going a different direction at night. And they went back to talk for a while. It was an interesting 3 years. I really liked the people I worked with. I did walk into the newsroom one day to find in the news director's office paramedics beating on his chest. He died in his office. And this was the guy that Howard Stern referred to as pig vomit. Kevin, thank you, Kevin Matheny. Yeah, that was his name. I got along with him fine, but son of a gun, the guy, yeah, that was a traumatic day. So that was kind of memorable. I should mention, I used to do these features. Well, all right. Years ago, some of you may be familiar with the news blimps. Back when stations, music stations, had to have some news content, they did, and Ben Manila, a local producer, actually put it together. They would air these news blimps, which would be a newsworthy topic, but with music and clips from TV shows or movies mixed in. And the whole idea was it made it more palatable for music audiences. So when I got to Colorado, and we were doing them at KMEL, when I got to Colorado, they were called Another Look, and I did them there. And then when I got to KFOG, the general manager, Tony Salvador, said he didn't want the station just to be a jukebox. So they wanted me to do this feature, and we kicked it around, and I came up with the title Fog Files. And they said, yeah, okay, that works. So being a reporter, it's great because I got, basically it was carte blanche. Just go out and interview whoever you want. And at times it was like, oh, geez, what am I going to do it on this week? But most of the time it was just me going out and getting people's stories. And there were some memorable ones. There was one where this guy was telling me that, talking to me about what he thought was going to be the next best thing. You see, this thing's going to be huge. It's called the World Wide Web. Shows you how long I've been doing that. This was probably early 90s. I went to a cafe in the Mission District where they had a computer set up where you could sit there and communicate with somebody in another cafe. And I asked the barista what she thought of it, and she said, I don't know, it just seems like such an in-prison sort of thing to do. It's like, yeah, but it has caught on. It did catch on. I interviewed a woman once. She lived in the Tenderloin, and she would go out, older black woman, she would go out and take pictures of the drug dealers and the drug deals going down and then put them out online because she wanted to discourage it. And she had been threatened and had her camera stolen at times and stuff, but she was still going for it, and I found her amazing. Another memorable one, there was a local pediatrician who had grown up near the Pine Ridge Reservation, and to start to encourage a healthier lifestyle on the reservations, she would bring Native Americans to San Francisco for a couple of weeks, teach them to swim, teach them healthy eating habits, and they would culminate, and it was very symbolic, by having the Native Americans swim from Alcatraz to Aquatic Park without wetsuits. One woman they never told us there's such a thing as a wetsuit. But the first year I covered it, one of the swimmers' his name was Al Capone Whitecalf. That was his real name. And so I go to Aquatic Park when the swimmers are supposed to get there soon, and it's me and one of the volunteers, and they radio that they're going to bring in one of the swimmers on a raft because he's struggling out there. And it comes in, and it's like, usually you go to cover a story, oftentimes in your mind you can't kind of have an idea how it's going to go, but with this, it was just happening. And there was only the one guy to help, so I went out on the dock to help bring the guy in too, and also hit the record button. And son of a gun, it was Al Capone Whitecalf, because he was rail thin in that water. He came out shivering, saying, "Oh, I feel like I let everybody down." And the guy says, "No, you're fine, you know." And it was just very dramatic, and I had it all on tape, and it turned out pretty interesting. And you know, so many stories like that over the years, and others that, maybe they were okay, but I got it done, you know. So I did the FOG files for those 18 years, and then when I went to KGO, the news director, Paul Hosley, great guy, says, I really like the FOG files, but here, let's call it the Finch Files. And it's like, all right, further branding for me, great. So I did the Finch Files for those 3 years. And again, I could do it on anything I want. One that sticks out on my mind, because I walked in and Paul and one of the reporters, Rob, said, "How did you get that audio?" It was a guy who you could pay to go running with. He would take tourists on a run from along the Embarcadero out to Golden Gate Bridge and back, and the person got to run with somebody who knew the area. Well, how am I going to cover it? Well, I followed them on my bike, and then at one point I rode ahead of them, jumped off my bike, and started running next to them as they were talking. And it turned out really well, and it was a lot of fun. But so, yeah, I was at KGO 3 years, got the call, and then it's like no radio stations were beating a path to my door. I was kind of in a little bit of a beef with the union, SAG-AFTRA, because they had reached out to me and said, "Oh, sorry, we couldn't save your job, and by the way, you owe us $4,000. I didn't think I owed it to them. Maybe I did, but it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So it's like, all right, what am I going to do then? Well, I had done some stories out at Alcatraz, and I'm kind of a history buff. So I went online and Googled Alcatraz jobs, and, okay, I can submit an application. Turns out the boss there was a big foghead. They had just switched to taking applications online, and he thought mine was a test run, that somebody had just put my name through to make sure it works. And they assured him, no. So he gave me a call. and I ended up getting a job at Alcatraz. In the meantime, though, maybe there's a couple years there that I wasn't technically in radio, but I did turn the Finch Files into a podcast, which I put out, and was proud to say SF Gate one year named it one of the top 10 local podcasts. But the thing was, and I was on Patreon where people could subscribe and send me a little money. It wasn't a big money maker, but it was just me staying active as a reporter. And then I started a second podcast called Alcatraz, where, when I got the job at Alcatraz, I really immersed myself in the history of it. I could spend a whole nother couple of hours telling you Alcatraz stories, but I did those as a podcast too. One day I was near the bookstore where we would collect the audio players, and an old guy comes up to me and says, "I need some muscle." He was an ex-convict, and he wanted me to schlep his books over to where he'd be autographing them. But Bill Baker, he and I became friends. One day he asked me, "What's your shoe size?" "Oh, 14. What's yours?" A couple days later, he gives me some size 14 shoes he had his wife buy for me. So I got to be friends with him and a former guard who both wrote books and would come out to sign them. And you can guess who the visitors wanted to have their picture taken with and whose autograph they wanted. Bill Baker, right? But he was never a violent criminal, but he told me he just got too old to be an outlaw. And so he wrote this book, and he'd come out and sign it, and he was getting his Social Security after not collecting Social Security while you're in prison most of your life. But he had been at Alcatraz back in the 60s. So anyway, I'm doing the podcast a bit. A former, and KGO at one point had let most of the news staff go, and one of the producers, Mel Baker, I helped get him a job at Alcatraz because he was looking for work too, and he was a history buff. He really liked it, but at one point he said, "Man, I need to make more money," because it didn't pay much. And he went over to Total Traffic, which is iHeartMedia's traffic service, and started working for them. And then he told me, "You should come over there. The women that run it, Kathy Coates and Ellen Hyde, are really nice." And I was ready, to get back into radio and settle up with the union. This was after like 3 or 4 years. And I went over there, and Ellen had me do a little test traffic report and record it. And as a reporter, I had never done traffic. And I know some radio people even kind of look down on traffic a little bit. But they hired me, and it was a blast. I loved, you're like traffic detective, finding out what's going on. It used to be eye in the sky, helicopters and planes. Now it's all road sensors. You could be traffic reporters yourself. You just go home, put in Google Maps, put in the CHP CAD, which explains all the situations going on. And we've got our own producers too. But I really enjoyed doing it, and I'm still doing that to this day. I've got a few gigs. During COVID, they had us all in home studios. Since life got back to semi-normal, the full-timers have to go into the studios on Townsend 3 times a week. Us part-timers can still do it from home. So I'll be in a spare bedroom at home petting the dog, doing traffic for Fresno from Moss Beach, California, which is kind of trippy, but a lot of fun. And I get, and I'm a part-timer, and then shortly, and I mean like maybe days after Total Traffic hired me, I got a call from KCBS, and I used to check in with them maybe a couple times a year. "You got anything?" "No, sorry." Well, all of a sudden, they were offering me a shift, weekend overnights. I had come full circle, and it was like, oh man, weekend overnights. I could do it in my 20s. Can I do it now? Turns out I can, and I kind of like it. The commute's a breeze. It's kind of chill in the middle of the night. I do like being that one live voice people can hear in the middle of the night, because most of it's voice tracked. Even unfortunately, I also got hired, and am still technically hired as an on-call announcer for KQED, About a year and a half ago, they stopped having a live voice on overnight. So if you hear one of the announcers during the overnight shift on KQED, it's recorded beforehand. But I still get called in there occasionally, and sometimes they have me, Total Traffic has me do traffic for them. But in the meantime, KCBS came calling, and I'm just, I'm 66 now, so I guess it's kind of a retirement job, but it's like I don't have to do it, but I want to do it, and that makes all the difference in the world. And I want to be that person that and they do call sometimes, oh, can you fill in this, can you do that shift? And I want to be that person that says yes, being that reliable fill-in person. But when I can't do it, I say, oh man, I got something going on. They're like, oh, okay. And they just move on to the next person. They don't hold it against you. And my wife retired about a year ago, so I'm trying to say no more often so I can spend more time with her. But in the meantime, at least 2 shifts a week on KCBS. Again, tonight I'll be on all night. I hope I'm not blowing out my voice here. And tomorrow night. But then, sometimes I get called in to do a 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift. But I do the other 9 to 5, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. But at times it's you get a little tired. Not like the operator of the Judah. Did you see that video? That I don't. If I fall asleep on the board, nobody gets jostled around. It sometimes there's one PSA that's kind of got a beat to it that we have choreographed, me and the editors. So it's like our aerobic workout during the overnight shift. But I do like. And usually it's pretty quiet during that overnight shift, but I like it. Every now and then, maybe some news will break, or one morning around 3 a.m., we had an earthquake here in Berkeley. You start taking calls from the listeners, where are you? What did you feel? All that stuff. And that's always a bit of a charge, because even though I consider myself a radio guy who does news, I still like to do news, and I like to break stories and do everything I can in that regard. But that's pretty much my career in radio, and I look forward to hearing any questions or comments or stories that you've got. But thanks for listening to me.
Thanks. Peter, I think before we take questions, it's now time for me to say, Peter Finch, this is your life.
How do you...
Yeah, you're on.
That coming through okay? Okay, yeah, no, I hear it. Let's hit rewind and go back to KBCO. You mentioned the city councilman that bought that station. Who did he buy that station from?
Bob Greenlee. I know he sold it years later for Noble Broadcasting for several million. I got there after he had bought it, so I don't know. Who did he buy it from? You?
Yes.
Who are you?
A ghost from your past.
Should I be embarrassed that I didn't recognize you? Or?
You should be embarrassed.
Okay.
Now, were you on the station from day one?
No.
Okay, so you moved in there shortly after Dennis Constantine.
Yeah, a couple of years. I got there in '84. What year did you sell it?
No, I had no ownership.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Now, do you recall the turntables that they used there?
Yeah.
Do you recall one of them blowing up?
No.
Okay, one of the turntables blew up, and you guys only had one turntable for months until I could figure out how to fix it. I was scared to death of switching mode power supplies, and those turntables had this massive motor underneath the...
So were you chief engineer?
No.
An engineer.
An engineer working, fixing stereos.
Okay.
Now, what was unique about KBCO's advertising format?
I don't know. What was unique about
Well,
it?
if they didn't like the copy that they had been provided, with some obnoxious jingle, they would go and do voiceovers and, just copy all the verbiage from the original ad, but
They would
in their own voice. And did you ever do any voiceovers?
No, I didn't do commercials there because they kept news separate from commercials.
Oh,
But
okay.
I can believe that KBCO was so unique, and again, it was owned by a city councilman. But they'd have weekly music meetings where stations have music directors who, maybe they follow the national charts and they confer with the program director. KBCO had a weekly music meeting where anybody could attend, mostly it was the DJs, and put in their 2 cents about songs that had come out, whether they should be played. I don't remember the turntable blowing up there. I do remember one time in Santa Maria when I was first starting out, and I put on Commander Cody's Hot Rod Lincoln, and I hit play, and it said, "My pappy said, son, you're going to drive me to drink." This turntable died, and I grabbed whatever album I could to track through while I called the engineer, and it happened to be one of the worst albums ever. It had just come out, but it was different people doing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, like Steve Martin doing Maxwell's Silver Hammer.
Yeah.
Aerosmith wasn't bad with their rendition, but it was not a great album. But I didn't know that when I put it on. And it's like, here, we're going to premiere this new album, while secretly I'm going, engineer, get down here. Anyway, any other KBCO memories?
Yeah, well, the thing was, their first week or so on the air, the paperwork had not gone through. So they couldn't say KBCO. Instead, they were using the previous call signs, KRNW.
Oh, wow.
And it's Robert Neely Wilkinson.
Do you remember the call letters of the AM station we had there?
No.
KADE,
That's
which eventually they donated to the University of Colorado when AM stations were, when you wanted to donate them to colleges.
In any case, I brought you an artifact that's been hanging in my garage for a couple of years. If they were to hang it up here, it'd be meaningless. But that is the station that preceded
Oh, wow.
KBCO.
Yeah, this is amazing. I'm still in touch with Dennis Constantine. I'll have to take a photo of this and show it to him.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
What had occurred was KBCO bought the station from Bob Wilkinson, and they put him on payroll.
Huh.
And he was living high on the hog for years. He had no responsibility at the station, but he was a regular salaried person. And he had that played on the back of a convertible Mercedes that died in his driveway with the convertible top down, and it just completely destroyed the car.
Oh, wow.
But two of my friends were executives of the estate, and they sent me that.
That is
And I
awesome.
think it
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
One other Boulder story. At one point, the city councilman sold the station to Noble Broadcasting, it was called at the time. And at one point during that company's tenure, all of a sudden they had our AM station start airing Stanford football games. And you're going, we're in Boulder, Colorado. Why are we playing Stanford football games? Well, it turned out the CEO's son played for Stanford. And that son went on to play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Denver Broncos, and he's now the general manager of the San Francisco 49ers. Lynch is his name. Yeah, so his dad had us playing Stanford football games. And yeah, John Lynch, I worked in Boulder. It became kind of a family affair. I worked with his aunt and his sister. Yeah, little fun fact there. Any other questions?
Can you tell them who you are?
My name's Alan Martin.
Alan Martin.
And I'm a member, life member here,
Okay.
a significant donor.
And spent some time in Colorado, obviously.
About 26 years
Okay.
in Boulder County.
I loved the time in Colorado. It was a good 8 years. The Rockies were beautiful, but I learned that I really need a big ocean near me. It was great to get back. Anyway, all right. Next question. Yeah.
In all of the interviews you've done and all the people, is there anybody that you would have liked to interview that you didn't?
Wow. Yeah, so many people. I'm trying to think of ones where I really tried hard and it, well, yeah, I would have loved, I did a piece on Ira Glass of, This American Life, and I interviewed Richard Gonzalez, a local NPR reporter. He talked about how Ira started out, and I recorded a little bit of Ira doing a thing at Zellerbach Hall in Berkeley, but I didn't get to interview him in person. Some interviews I could brag about, during his first run for president, it was over the phone, but got to interview Barack Obama twice. The first time, I wasn't happy with the interview because I was doing 2 interviews at once. In one studio, it was Barack Obama. In the other studio, it was Melissa Etheridge. And I didn't give either my full attention. But the one I was proud of, it was actually the morning of the election when he won his first presidential election. And it's like, I think, they reached out. I think he's going to call us, and then, oh, it's off. It's not happening. And then, all right, we've got Senator Barack Obama on the line. Oh, okay, I felt like that interview went really well. Gotten to interview Paul McCartney a few times over the phone. These were over the phone in the studio. And this was the thing, like Morning Drive. I got to go to so many concerts, but I could only stay for like the first 3 songs because I had to go home and go to bed. But the trade-off was I'd be sitting there, and sitting right next to me is Elvis Costello playing his guitar, or Steve Miller. I thought I had brought a picture of Steve Miller. Anyway, or whoever, and these bands would come in and play, and that was a lot of fun. Yeah. Yes. No, darn it, no. We weren't playing a lot of Pat Benatar on KFOG, unfortunately, by the time I got there. That would have been fun.
Some of you, I guess, obviously, some of you know that Peter is our director for the CHRS Radio Dog Players, and he's been directing our live radio plays that we do on Radio Day, and we have one coming up next month. How did you get involved in theater?
So I had done some theater in high school, and then radio took hold. But when my daughter was little, she started getting into theater, and it reminded me of how much fun it was. And I actually got to be in a couple of plays with her at Young Performers Theater down at Fort Mason, Babar, and Willy Wonka. That was a lot of fun. But I started auditioning for shows, and I fell in with a theater company that shared my comic sensibility. So I actually wrote 2 plays that were staged in San Francisco and one at the Julia Morgan in Berkeley. One was called Ah Rosebud. It was a retelling of Citizen Kane, but with zombies and the sport of curling. So that was one. The other was called Aaron Trotter and the Incident of Bikini Beach. That one was a Harry Potter 60s beach movie mashup. And for a radio audience, what was cool about that one, so I wanted set in the 60s, and I wanted like a top 40 jock setting up each scene. So I reached out to somebody that I think I listened to on KCBQ in San Diego when I was little, Bobby Ocean. And would you cut these for me? And he did. He was real nice about it. He sent it to me, and he and Ben Fong Torres ended up coming and seeing the play. But it was his voice used throughout the play, and it really added a lot. It was very cool. So anyway, I did a lot of plays with them, and then when you offered me the opportunity to help out here, have any of you seen the radio dramas we've done? Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We have a good time. Yeah.
I was asked to point out to you, and I need to tell you, that there is some, around the room here, there is some pieces of signed KFOG art and rock and roll posters, which are all signed, and they can be yours. So just select something you like and go talk to Michael. And to Peter, thank you so much for coming.
We had a couple more questions.
Questions. Please.
What radio stations do you listen to regularly?
You know what? I love the music we played on KFOG, and nobody in this market's really playing it right now, but I can turn you on to some apps. That's the beauty these days. There are stations like KFOG dotted around the country. I really like The Coast in Fort Bragg. Our former nighttime DJ, Dred Scott, is the morning DJ. And my old mentor, Joe Rogelski, it is a music station that does morning news. He's in his mid-70s now, late 70s, and he's up there doing news every morning. There's that. I listen to The Peak in suburban New York. They do 10 at 10 every day. I found a station in Indianapolis. WXRT in Chicago, that's where Annalisa is doing middays right now. For that one, you have to download the Odyssey app, which is the company that owns KCBS. And Odyssey, when I first heard that, people are going to spell Odyssey, and you have to say, no, it's Audacy. But if you have that app, you can listen to Annalisa. So, there are stations here and there. And then there's this station I'm kind of enjoying that's out of Seattle, but they took the old K-Jazz signal here. Yeah. Help me out. What are they called? KEXP. Yeah, and here it's KEXC. And that's a station where the jocks are just regular people talking to you, and I love that. And the music, sometimes it's something like, not my cup of tea, but other times it's like, you played the whole version of Kraftwerk's Autobahn. That's like 20 minutes long, bless you. So I like listening to that station. And then for news, I'll go back and forth between KCBS and KQED. I think KCBS is really good for local, shorter reports, and then KQED for the more thought-provoking pieces. But thanks for that question. Any more questions? Yeah, Gavin Newsom what's that? It's been interesting to see him morph. We had a concert, a KFOG concert at the Concord Pavilion, and we had Gavin Newsom in a dunk tank, while his wife Kimberly Guilfoyle looked on. He was an up-and-comer, but he would come in, and I was impressed with him when we were interviewing him because he did seem pretty forthcoming. And he even, once on our show, he made some news because he said, I forget what the problem was, but it was like, if this hasn't been corrected in a year, you call back and correct me on that. And I think somebody did call a year later and say, how's that going? It's interesting. I'm not going to comment any further because I feel like something I pride myself in is I want it to be where listeners tune in and they can't tell where I stand politically. That's my goal, Well, thank you. And that's certainly not the case when you tune into some of the cable news networks these days, And it saddens me to see how partisan a lot of the cable news has become. And I think we all, we can think for ourselves. Just give us, tell us what's going on. We'll decide how we want to go. But anyway, that's my goal as a news anchor. Yeah.
Hey, Bob, do you have any old stories you can tell us about Peter?
Oh, Pat, you mean?
Pat.
Pat and I went to Adams Junior High together.
When you were in junior high, I'm enjoying a sandwich in the back. Back in junior high, Peter had said he wanted to be in radio. And I could not believe at the time that you would do that. I had no idea what I would want it to be and how that would work out. And, you just had your head in that slot and you just did it.
Yeah, I consider myself lucky to have found my calling at such a young age. And these stories I've told about hanging out at the station at 2 in the morning and being put on the air, or flying to Monterey to make $10 on a weekend, it's all because of a passion for radio, a passion, I don't know if you share it to the same degree, but that you're all really into. I have to tell a story about Pat. When he and his two brothers, when they were young kids, their dad had brought some recording equipment, and he wanted to test it out. So he and his wife packed the boys up in their VW minibus. They had heard about this free concert. They all headed off to Altamont. Yeah. You didn't see the guy get stabbed, but you saw some.
We saw lots of interesting things.
Yeah.
I was 9 years old. Yeah, that was my first concert. Was at Altamont when people asked that question. I remember, though, something about a news article, you quoting Bible verses at KBCO.
Oh, man. I've already embarrassed myself with some of these articles, but I was doing a news story, and I wanted to, and it said the person had quoted from Leviticus, except I said quoted from lascivious. That made the papers, but I survived it. Thanks for bringing that up, Pat.
Yeah, that's a fun fact.
No, we're, Yeah.
Also, my daughter's living in New York right now, and when I mentioned we were going to do this, she said, "Thank Peter for Elmo." I'll always remember that.
Oh, what was the
Elmo? You were interviewing Elmo on KFOG, and you had him say something for her.
Oh,
she was
okay.
Like 3 at the time.
We had some, for years I would just always have a microphone handy at home too. And my kids, when they were little, like Pocahontas was so saturated that every time we'd say it, my son would scream, "Ah!" So we had fun playing that. One time it was great though. I was in this park. We were doing a Dave Matthews giveaway on the station. I'm in this park, and there's this young guy sitting on a bench playing Dave Matthews songs. And I said, "All right, can you play the opening to 3 of them? And then I'll record them, and then we'll have people guess them." And he did, and we did. And that's when radio is most engaging when it's fun. It's people talking, and it's not this chuck and jive sort of stuff. It's just people having a good time, and that comes through. Yeah. Well, yeah, tell Fiona I'm glad we could do that for her. Yeah. How long have I talked? Huh? Not bad.
Well, anybody else with any questions? Let's thank Peter for coming, and
Thank you, 11 o'clock tonight, traffic and weather together on the 8th. I'll talk to you then.
all right, and watch for us on December 13th, and watch for our schedule next year of our guest speakers coming up to be announced, and participate in our activities.
Yeah, to hype the thing on the 13th, we're going to have Terry McGovern playing Ozzie Nelson.
So this should be fun. But thanks again, Peter, and you were a big part of me listening to radio, and it's when you guys broke up the morning show, it was like my family was leaving.
Yeah, I know.
That's the way that you guys made us feel. So
Yeah, it's kind of felt that way to us too.
Yeah.
All right.
again, thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Yeah.
All right, buddy.